Okay, I will definitely say I didn't see some of those scores coming this week, JB. This was an interesting week for sure, but around the nation is giving kind of a play to this idea that we've learned a lot about what we didn't know, and maybe we're wrong about a lot of things along the way. I'm not so sure we're
Yeah.
there yet. I think this is week one every year, and we could probably have the same discussion every year. What do you think?
Well, I think in week one, we base a lot on what happens in the year before and how teams play before and their records, and then all of a sudden they don't win in week one, and we're like, oh, well, are they not as good as they used to be? Or it's hard to say. A lot of turnovers, a lot of penalties, a lot of mistakes in week one, too. So I don't necessarily think the jury's out on some of the teams that lost, but I also don't think that the teams that won are necessarily as good as maybe they think they are yet. We'll see.
Yeah, I make the argument that you'll see more teams win by 70 than should, and more teams win by only 7 that should win by 30 than you should see. And they'll start to normalize by week 3. This is why you don't play high-quality matchups in week 1, as far as I'm concerned, because it's tough enough playing week 1, getting your rhythm back and everything else. You're playing garbage football, I think, if you're playing great teams in game 1. Florida and Miami, I think, were great examples of that this year. Florida State Miami back when used to be same thing. Florida State Miami is a huge rivalry. And they put it into Labor Day. It was horrible football when they did that. So, and that's Division 1. Imagine what we're going to see in Division 3 in the same respect. So nobody gets free passes for their losses, but they can be forgotten about because now hey, you got to win your conference if you lost on Saturday. And even if you lost the game on Saturday, technically 8-2 could get you in, but you're not going to think that way in the East. Brockport, you got to win the Empire 8 now. Montclair, you got to win the NJAC now. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, there was the Montclair loss to Southern Virginia. To me, was actually the biggest surprise of the weekend because I really was believing in Montclair as the 10-0 NJAC champ. Plus, but now. Jaquil Birch and company, a lot of turnovers. They've got a lot of work to do.
Certainly do. Wesley comes out smelling like roses after that game, but we're going to learn a lot about what all that meant because Wesley's got to play DelVal. By the way, who is it? Curry's got to play Franklin Pierce next, I think, this coming weekend. So there's a common opponent scenario. So we're going to see just how good or bad Franklin Pierce really was in the Division II sense as well.
That's true. I mean, Curry started off, they played Stevenson tough for a quarter or so, and then the ball got rolling in the other direction. But honestly, Frank, it was interesting because some of the not so power conferences of the East actually performed better than some of the power conferences, and we'll talk about that a little more in this episode.
So here's what's coming up in this episode. We're going to go to our Crunchtime segment to start, which is complete review. We're going to touch them all, and that's a lot of games. Almost, about 40 or so, I want to say?
40,
give or take?
Yeah, about 40, 38 or 39, something like that, yeah.
So we're going to touch them all very quickly with some video highlights from each conference, actually. We're going to get some video highlights to you. Then we're going to slow it down a little bit, look at the entire win-loss situation and the schedule for the following week. And as we do that, we're going to bring you coach interviews in this episode. The next episode, which will be released on Wednesday if you're watching chronologically with us here, will be player interviews that we did throughout the weekend and with Jason Bowen as well, contributing to us or for us. He got some WPI interviews. And
another JB.
Yes, indeed. And Wesley interviews as well. So we've got a panoply of interviews, I guess is the right word for it. And we would be remiss at this point. Our friends at Otterbein unfortunately had to go through some very tough news, and we try to cover this as best as we can. But as you can see on the screen, Nigel Chapman, who's only, I guess, about 21 years old, give or take. I'm not sure his exact birth date, but 1998 to 2019, passed away Friday. I believe a car accident was the cause of death. And very sad state of affairs there that we lose a D3 player. We've seen some D3 alumni pass over the months, but here's an example of a current player that way too early, as always we say, and we send our condolences out to our friends at Otterbein. Okay, as Otterbein proved to us this weekend, football does go on despite the losses. So let's get on ourselves, and it is time for crunch time for the week of September. I should say the weekend of, because it was multiple days. September 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2019.
Yeah.
First game was a game that I really thought was going to be a good one, and it was. In fact, the score doesn't really represent it. 55-27, Endicott over Framingham State. Framingham State tried to come back in this game, but the Rams could not do it. Kowalski with 5 touchdowns passing, 5 turnovers, though, by Framingham State. That really did them in that game.
Certainly did. I think the Rams' offensive line needs a little work, and hopefully they'll get there. I mean, they can still win in Mascac, but Endicott looked real good in their first game.
Pinch and Saw goes back to Western New England. Home teams have been ruling the roost on this game lately, 33-17. 351 total yards for Alec Coleman, a former guest of In the Huddle. 2 touchdowns for him, and just 78 rushing yards from the quarterbacks of Springfield. That's not good in the triple option, obviously. Anna Maria falls to Becker, 33-19. Hey, Becker, congratulations on that win, but our friend Coach Mulroney with a loss to start the season. They'll have to face Union soon. We'll talk later about that. Outrushed the Amcats 292-44, and also Nichols 37, Dean 12. Kind of surprised by that score. 23 unanswered by the Bison in the third. Tell me something about one of those games, though, as well.
Well, I think Nichols was the one thing that stood out to me, especially the amount of points that they won by. I think the Bison is an underrated team, kind of flying under the radar on the CCC. We'll see if they can, push themselves into the conference championship conversation soon.
We should know that we're going in these slates with all these inter-conference games with the winning team of that conference, or we'll put it on that slate, or if it's an out-of-region game, it'll go there either way, win or loss. So that's how this separation is going to occur for those wondering. That's why the ECFC only has one team or one game listed. That's Maine Maritime losing to SUNY Maritime 24-21. Now, with a minute 18 left, I think it was, SUNY Maritime gets the ball back down 21-14, scores to tie the game, and wins it in overtime with the field goal. As time expires with a field goal in this game, 24-21. They trail by 14 with 7:46 to go. What a comeback. And Coach Rearing, our guest last week, should be proud of his guys.
Hey, give it up to Joseph Gallardi, not Gagliardi. He made, not only did he kick the game-winning field goal, but very important extra point after they tied the game with about 1 minute and so left. I mean, give it up to the kickers. He's my special teams player of the week. Frank, we may talk about that a little bit later, but a big-time win for Mickey Rearing and the Privateers.
The Mascac had some interesting results, and first we're going to go with WestCon 12, William Patterson 9. I believe that was an overtime game, if I remember correctly, and it does say so. 3 interceptions by David James were overcome as he went for 160 yards passing and a 25-yard game-winning touchdown to Will Daniels. Give William Patterson some credit here because they are kind of the perennial doormat, it seems like, of the NJAC, yet they almost beat WestCon, who is a team that was one I'm watching, at least, from the Mascac. So this is an interesting result, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it was 6-6 at the end of regulation. Field goal for Willie P in the first possession, and ultimately the Colonials held out with the touchdown there at the end. Kind of a surprise because we thought a little more of the Colonials and their offensive power, but hey, it's a win's a win, and they're moving on. Amen
to that. Also, Plymouth State 23, Castleton 17, closer than I thought that one would be. 18 for 146. David Hamilton was on the ground, 2 touchdowns, including the game winner with 6:46 left. And Mass Dartmouth 54, Alfred State 7. Let's move on to the new MAC, and we have 5 scores to look at here. Carnegie Mellon 24, MIT 7 in the Battle of the Brains, as I called it. And it was tied 7-7 at halftime, but Carnegie Mellon's defense forced 2 MIT turnovers in the third, and that led to 10 points, and there was no looking back at that point. Bubna can't be thrilled with that result.
No, and I think especially given the fact that the Tartans have been sort of a mid-level pack team these last couple seasons, it's a bit of a reality check for MIT. They're going to need to regroup and get back into it because the new MAC race is still wide open, but this is definitely a setback for them.
Kenyon, how many straight losses did they have before this game against Catholic? 26 or something like that?
Something
incredible.
It's a long line.
30-31. They went for 2 in the second overtime, as I think you should, honestly, if you're on the road and you know what's coming up in the third overtime. You might as well, especially when you got nothing to lose, and they didn't lose. They won it 32-31. Norwich over Salve Regina. I'll give you credit for this one, my friend, because you called them out last week. Norwich as one of the sleepers, you thought. 22-19, a missed field goal with time expiring by Salve Regina secured the win for Norwich, and both quarterbacks had over 40 pass attempts. That game had to take about 14 hours to play, if that's the case. Coast Guard 27, University of New England 17, 7 sacks for the Coast Guard defense, and WPI 51, Worcester State 0. The Lancers couldn't find their lances, apparently, in that game, as WPI outgained them 460-147. Coach Searoff had to be happy about that. We'll hear from him later. But that Norwich game, let's go back to it for half a second. What'd you think?
Put this into your brain for this season. There's a kid named Matt Dunn. He can throw the football really well. And for those that think that the new MAC is either the WPI or maybe Springfield or MIT's to win, well, guess what? The Cadets are coming, and they've got a great aerial offense, and Matt Dunn is leading the way.
Well, don't forget about Merchant Marine, who wasn't in that slide for a reason, but, there's something to talk about there, too, coming up later.
True.
Well, number 13, Brockport, didn't have a good day. Let's just put it that way. Hobart wins the game 33-7 as the defense forces 5 interceptions. Ryan Hoffman with 4 passing touchdowns on the afternoon. 2 to senior wide receiver Jake Catalliato. Close enough?
Catalliato, hey, come on, man. Yeah, exactly. But the Hobart game was a little crazy because there was a lot of defensive play, not a lot of offense. So the Hobart offense benefited from some of the short fields. They couldn't really run the ball that well, but Hoffman made some pass plays when he needed to, especially there was one 58-yard bomb to Catalliato, which really put the game away. And apparently Hobart's back.
At least for now.
By the way.
Yes, it was my sleeper. They'll play Morrisville State coming up soon. That should be an interesting game coming up. Allegheny only trailed in yardage by about 100 yards to RPI, but because 5 turnovers occurred, they lost to RPI, number 19 in the country, 52-14. Union 42, Westfield State 7. Well, more about the record in a little bit, actually, but Union with a big win there. Ithaca 66, St. Vincent 28. If your name was Germanario, you had a good weekend. Let's just put it that way at this point. As Joe went 27 for 37 for 303, 6 touchdowns, 3 to Will Gladney. Yeah, and Case Western takes care of Rochester 37-6 as Colt Morgan, the wide receiver for Case Western Reserve, went 9 catches for 146 yards and 3 touchdowns. But the Germanario Liberty League stint here, John in the backup role, Joe in the Ithaca first team role, had an interesting weekend to say the least.
Definitely did.
Empire 8. Where we used to talk about Joe back in the old days. Utica. I got out to this game. Utica 40-14 over St. Lawrence. Elijah Bell with 2 big interceptions in consecutive possessions in the first half. One being a pick 6. You'll see this one as well playing out on video. And then this touchdown to our favorite dude, Peyton Miller, sealed the deal for Utica as Logan Wilcox had 203 yards, 2 touchdowns, and as we said, Elijah Bell with 2 interceptions in the game. St. John Fisher 23, Buffalo State 6, as Fisher seemed to really dominate in this game more than I would have thought they would have. 3 interceptions, 3 sacks. The defense definitely showed up for them. Morrisville State 39, Bridgewater State 7, as the Morrisville State offense capitalized on 3 turnovers, Their defense held BSU, as we call them, Bridgewater State University, to only 68 rush yards. Alfred, 42. Havacoteal, 0. That commercial is proving to be true. Hopefully everybody stays to the end of that game.
You notice a theme here, Frank, that there's a lot of games where a certain team commits anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 turnovers. That's week 1 for you. I don't think we're going to see that for the rest of the season. We might see a couple of those blow-ups in week 1 and week 2. Teams are going to clean that up in these lopsided scores of where we think it's supposed to be close, but it ends up not being so. I think that's going to change.
Cortland, 63, Fitchburg State, 0. That would tell us a little bit more right there about possibly what to expect. That shouldn't have been that lopsided of a game on any other day, probably. But Cortland definitely going to get some attention for a score like that. But look, Utica, I don't think is a team that's going to be beating every opponent by 26 to 30 points. They'll play closer games throughout the season. Buffalo State's a team that probably should have shown up better than that. So again, you're right that things are a little deceiving, I think, on this slate, especially. We'll see how it proves out later. We have 10 scores from the MAC to go through. So let's start with some video from DelVal Kane on Friday, 37-7. I was at that game. Delaware Valley outgained Kane 452 to 126. We'll have interviews from this game as well, but you can see some great play here by Delaware Valley to take care of this game. But we should talk about our guests from last week. James Gillespie, 13 catches, 158 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So we said what a great guy he seemed like and an intense football player we thought he would be. And now back from injury, he is indeed. 38-28. Widener seniors beat Rowan for the first time. In fact, it's the first win since 2014 by Widener. FDU Florham, 56. Merchant Marine, 48 with nearly 1,300 yards. We were just talking about the idea of Merchant Marine still being in the equation of the new MAC with 454 rushing yards. But Anthony Caserta, Jagger Green's heir apparently, 522, 7 touchdowns. Incredible numbers across the board in that game.
A lot of offensive fireworks in the MAC, I think, this weekend. Some lopsided scores, but some closer games too. That I think the Merchant Marine hung in there, but at the end of the day, if FDU Florham can keep putting up there with the receiving core, they're going to be a tough team to beat in the MAC.
Indeed. Susquehanna beats Lycoming 42-26 as 542 yards gained by Susquehanna in that game. Franklin and Marshall 35, Lebanon Valley 20. A combination of 5 interceptions, 10 punts, and 10 penalties by these teams. Not the clean game you'd hope for in week 1. Kings 23, Moravian 20. We had 2 one-play drives for Kings that basically helped them win that game. And go ahead, you're about to say something, I think.
No, sometimes ugly it doesn't have to be pretty, but you can win ugly, and that's one of those games where for Kings and the Monarchs, that's a win's a win. They're 1-0, so hey, that's how it goes.
McDaniel on our next slate here, 24, Misericordia 14. We talked about Misericordia's struggles in the Ithaca scrimmage. It seems to be maybe a little bit realistic to think that they're going to have a little bit of trouble this year. We'll see what happens as they were held to 3 for 12 on 3rd down in that game. Wilkes 38, Hartwick 21. Wilkes, look, the teams combined for 850 yards of offense, but only 59 points to show for. You would think that you get more points than that when you almost get to the 850, 900 range. So maybe had to clean up a little bit of slop there with the turnovers in that game. Alvernia 20, Gallaudet 14 on Friday night with 2 lead changes in the final 121 of that game. That for 2 straight years has been a real barn burner of a game. And Stevenson 34, Curry 0. Kind of the Stevenson team we expected to see, although we thought Curry would put up more of a fight in that game. They did not, as it was 34-0. NJAC, last but not least here. You talked about it earlier. Southern Virginia 34, Montclair State 21. So Southern Virginia starts 1-0 in the NJAC, except for the fact they're no longer in the NJAC. They're in the ODAC. And so it's an interesting result on a multitude of platforms here, but Montclair State now playing from behind for the rest of the season, it looks like, in that packed NJAC race. And Southern Virginia with a statement win. We'll see where it goes from there for those 2 teams. Number 8, Muhlenberg, 45. TCNJ, 26, was there for that game. I feel like I've said that a few times. Muhlenberg with 5 touchdowns from Michael Nikowski, 286 yards. He tied the school record with 5 passing touchdowns. North Central coming from the CCIW, to beat Christopher Newport 43-13, although Christopher Newport tried to make it interesting early. Wesley, 69, D2 Franklin Pierce, 0, as the two quarterbacks, Morocco, I think, and Mullen, 121 for 26, 247, 4 touchdowns. And Salisbury, 63, Albright, 28. Albright's defense got to show better than that when they play Mary Hardin Baylor next weekend. We'll talk more about that game later in the week, actually. But Jack Nowitzki's back with 3 passing touchdowns for the Gulls. And let's go finally to your Players of the Week superlatives here. The stat champs go to the offense, or offensive stat champs go to FDU quarterback Anthony Caserta, 522 yards and 7 touchdowns versus Merchant Marine. Defensively, Lebanon Valley inside linebacker Tyler Lutz has 16 tackles, and the Cortland team holding Fitchburg to 31 total yards. Special teams, SUNY Maritime place kicker Joseph Gallardi hits his 43-yard game-winning field goal in head coach Mickey Rearing's debut. Surprise of the weekend was Hobart, 5 interceptions, holding Brockport to 7 points. Most disappointing, Montclair State, just talked about, lost to Southern Virginia with those multiple turnovers and special teams errors. And the random stat, Union's perfect dual QB situation on an NCAA Division III record-setting day, 22 consecutive completions from 2 separate quarterbacks on the same team, and my car rental odometer went to 600 miles over when I started my weekend, and therefore we have our crunch time of week 1.
The one stat I missed was the fact that apparently there was a defensive player from DelVal, which it's not. Is it Nobile or Nobile?
Nobile.
6.5 tackles for loss in that game against Kane, which
4.5 at halftime. 4.5 at halftime he had.
Yeah, I know it got mentioned on ATN, so we don't need to belabor it here, but that's probably, if trying to differentiate our picks a little bit, but that's definitely up there, and I'm sure Nobile will be a big factor in the upcoming game against Wesley, which is probably the game of the week for the East Region this Saturday.
So we're going to have an interview with Michael Nobile actually on our next show. And one thing I will state on this show, maybe to separate it from that, is for the first time in my history of doing these interviews at the sites, Michael decided he needed to look right for it, and so before I hit record, we face the screen toward us so that we can see ourselves when I do these interviews. And he got in there, he was like fixing his hair. It's like, Mike, you just play a game of football. You don't have to really worry about it. It's like, hey, gotta look good. I was like, I wish I had that recorded, to be honest with you. That was perfect.
That would have been number 1 in the blooper reel for sure.
Well, not beyond stuff we do, I'll tell you that much. So, JB, let's look at the different conferences right now. We're going to start actually with the ECFC, with the 6 teams in there, and move along to look at what's happened, what's coming up, and to have a few interviews to intersperse throughout this. SUNY Maritime, the only team that won in the ECFC on Saturday. Again, it does not bode well for a conference when 1 out of 6 teams wins a game. And it's not going to get much easier, as Union's going to be at Anna Maria. SUNY Maritime might be able to go 2-0 against Mass Maritime. We'll see what happens there. Castleton-Fitchburg State could be an interesting game. Hartwick at Alfred State. You got to think the scoreboard lights are going to get tested on that game. And Dean at Western Connecticut. WestCon's probably going to be salivating to try again here with a better result than a tie game at the end of regulation against William Patterson. So this does not get any easier for the ECFC. Mickey Rearing and Company, though, look like they are cut above right now slightly. I'm not by much, but slightly. But look, they're all 0-0 in the conference, and they're going to be that way for a while because I don't believe they begin conference play until about week 4 in this conference.
think it's actually even later than that, Frank. I think the first conference game is actually October 12th, which is week 6.
Maybe, yeah.
So it's going to be a while till we figure things out. I mean, the ECFC's it's such a diverse, widespread of both geographic locations and schools. A lot of stuff going on. Some newer coaches, some newer programs in Division III. So we'll keep an eye on it. But right now, they're kind of they're at the back of the line, and they'll work their way up.
I drove by the exit for Keystone, which is going to be the newest member of the ECFC when I was driving through Pennsylvania. Let me just tell you something. There must have been a certain sense of desperation to get another team into that conference, because this is not an easily accessible school in the state of Pennsylvania. And I mean, when you throw in the fact that Gallaudet's in the DC area, and you have them there, and you have Castleton where they are, and the rest of the crew, Dean, etc. This is like all over the Northeast and then some now, and Mid-Atlantic as well. So this is going to be an interesting conference to navigate if you're a football member for a while. I look, I know they needed 7 teams, but at the same time, I wonder how long this marriage of convenience will last for, ultimately, for these schools that have lower budgets. That's just a little side note. We'll see where it goes from here. CCC. Endicott, congratulations on that big win against Framingham State. In Western New England as well. It looks like the cream is rising to the top that we sort of expected, although Salve Regina losing to Norwich was a head-scratcher of sorts. Nichols being in a position here at 1-0, and Becker at 1-0. I'm not sure how real that is at the end of the day. We'll see. But Endicott and Western New England, teams that you expected to be there are there right now. Endicott will be playing Rochester at home Saturday at noon. Rochester didn't show much of a fight against Case Western Reserve, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do it again there. Western New England on Friday night against Westfield State. That could be an interesting game. I think Westfield State showed us who they kind of were against Union on Saturday. So Western New England doesn't put up a good showing against them. I start scratching my head a little bit about where the balance of power is in these different conferences. But, Westfield State playing at home on Friday night, it's going to be a big crowd game probably with a lot of pride on the line, good weather. They could put up a fight and maybe mess up things a little bit for Western New England. We'll see what happens.
I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, my biggest takeaway from this weekend is it does seem like the CCC as a whole has sort of moved itself to the top of the New England discussion. I mean, with all due respect to the NESCAC, who's actually going to play some football games this weekend, which is great. As far as teams that can qualify for the NCAA tournament, the CCC seems to have kind of taken the lead. The MASCAC sort of dropped off a little bit, and it's interesting to see how teams like Endicott and Western New England are really just kind of running with it.
Let's not forget Husson coming up for their first game against Mass Dartmouth this weekend. They'll have something to say about it as well.
Yeah. I've heard some rumblings on social media about why aren't the Corsairs getting a little more love. I mean, yeah, it's great that you threw 6 touchdowns against Alfred State, but let's see if you can beat Husson, then we'll talk about you. Okay.
There you go. That's James Baker that said that, folks. James Baker. Okay, just let's go to NEWMAC 3-5 on the weekend, which surprised me a little bit, to be honest with you.
Not great. Yeah.
WPI, Coast Guard, Norwich survived there. Springfield, Merchant Marine, and MIT with losses. That's where things really get surprising to you when you really think about it. Okay, Catholic they shouldn't have lost to Kenyon, really, but they did. And Maine Maritime, look, it was a great game against SUNY Maritime.
Yeah.
They should have won it by all means. So when you look at what's coming up here, Transit Trophy game, that's a big game. This could actually be a really good game for a ranked RPI team going into WPI. So we'll see what happens.
I know the national focus will probably be DelVal versus Wesley for obvious reasons. But as far as the East region goes and how basically what's going to be our 8-team pod of the playoffs, there's this game already in the second week of the season is going to have huge ramifications on who's in and who's out nationally in 9 weeks from now. If RPI wins, it's sort of, status quo. But if WPI wins, things could get interesting, especially if they lose later on or RPI wins later on. This game will have ripple effects based on the Liberty League tiebreakers and potentially the new MAC tiebreakers too, depending on how these conferences shake out.
Well said. Actually, I agree with you completely. You weren't selling me initially, but as you develop that, I agree with you. Yeah, exactly. Jim Moore, ladies and gentlemen, joining us. Springfield, though, 0-1. And the question is, we saw Kane first person, at least I did, on Friday night. Kane, they were okay. DelVal was just a cut above them. So this is going to be an interesting game, I think. If Springfield can't bounce back offensively with their quarterback play especially, Kane could actually have a chance to win this game. I don't know which way to go with it. I'd probably go with the home team here and stick with that. But Kane would not shock me if they won this game. And so, Coach Cerezulo's got to be careful here. It's start 0-2 is something I don't think he's ever had happen as head coach in his years. So we'll see where it goes. MASCAC. And kind of a full house here of sorts. Plymouth State, Western Connecticut, and Mass Dartmouth are the three teams. Hey, there's the Corsairs you were just talking about, correct? And so Mass Maritime yet to play. Framingham State being 0-1 and Bridgewater State being 0-1. A little bit surprising. Worcester State we're not that surprised about. We thought WPI would win that game, but to see Framingham State already 0-1, that's a little bit of a topsy-turvy scenario in this conference for us already.
Well, the Bridgewater State loss to me was actually really surprising, given the fact that it was to SUNY Morrisville, and they not only lost, but they lost by 32. And SUNY Morrisville is a good program, but they were basically like a 500, 6-5 team last year, and Bridgewater was potentially supposed to be the MASCAC champion. So if both Framingham State and them lose in their first game by 20 plus points, not a good look for the MASCAC early on. Hopefully they can learn from their mistakes, pick themselves up, and go from there.
Well, Bridgewater State plays St. John Fisher at Fisher this Saturday at noontime. Not going to get any easier. We talked about the Huston Mass Dartmouth game coming up. And Dean at Western Connecticut at 6 o'clock Saturday game. That's always a tough game for teams to come into play at Western Connecticut. They have a lot of these Saturday evening games. And here's one of them. I think that's just going to be a tough one for Dean to really have a good performance in. We'll see what happens. I remember Union playing there one time in that time slot, and we had thunderstorms basically interrupt the game, and Union lost badly in that game.
Don't forget Framingham at Brockport, which is now all of a sudden a must-win game for both of those teams. I mean, a rematch from the first round of the NCAA playoffs from last year. Neither one of those teams can really afford to start the season 0-2.
Let's move to the Liberty League. RPI, Ithaca, Union, Hobart. 4-3 was the conference. Those were the winners. The old days playing out here. RPI, Union, and Hobart. Ithaca is a new team to the mix. So maybe the three-headed monster with an extra head starting to play out here. We'll see. As,
extra Hydra, yes.
Yeah, Eric Wren would love that reference right there, our former co-host. Buffalo State at Utica will be an interesting game to see play out, see if Buffalo State can bounce back. Union at Anna Maria. You got to give Union the edge on that one by all means after what happened on Saturday in both directions there. Hobart at Morrisville State. I think it's a question of just how good Hobart looks. Will they look just as good 2 straight weeks? Will they get that defense to purr like it was on Saturday? And then RPI, WPI, not to belabor the Transit Trophy game, in case you didn't hear about 5 minutes ago, us talking about that. So the Liberty League looks pretty strong, but so does the Empire 8 at 5-2 on the weekend. St. John Fisher, Cortland, Morrisville State, Alfred, and Utica with the wins. You brought up the Framingham State Brockport scenario coming up. Just talked about the Utica game and Bridgewater State, St. John Fisher. Cortland at TCNJ. Cortland will win this game. The question is by how much. Will they look as good as they did against Fitchburg State on Saturday? I just don't think it's going to be a 60-point win, maybe like a 30-point win. TCNJ played a headstrong game against Muhlenberg, tried to come back with some late touchdowns, and made it look respectable, but they weren't really purring at all in the first 3/4 of that game against Muhlenberg.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see, because Fitchburg might not be a very good team, and maybe Cortland is a great team, or maybe they're an okay team. But with Brett Segala at the helm of that offense and the players that the Dragons have, they can put up a lot of points. And so I'm actually expecting like a 40-plus point win here, but we'll see.
George Fox at Alfred is a West Coast, East Coast special. We have 3 of those games coming up.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
And so we'll be tuning in for those cross-country games coming up throughout. We'll point out a couple more in a moment. The NJAC. What in God's name am I looking at here? 2-6? Frostburg, where did you go? We need you back.
They almost beat what is like West Virginia something. I mean, like literally a team that was picked to like be a potential playoff or a third place, second place team in D2, and they hung in there and first game. So congrats to Coach Fitz and company. I mean, you didn't get blown out, which we saw what happened with Franklin Pierce and some of these other things for these new D2 programs. So I mean, they're already making plays, but yeah, the NJAC had a rough weekend, but they also played pretty much above their weight class in a lot of ways.
Did it surprise you that we almost beat them, JB?
Not exactly.
Really bad. Delaney Fitzgerald. Wesley, though, at 1-0. Salisbury at 1-0. Well, we got a few weeks before they show off against each other. Montclair State, Rowan, Christopher Newport, teams that should be showing up as well in the top of the leaderboard as the season progresses, already at 0-1. We'll see where that goes. Linfield at Rowan. A little bit of luster taken off that game because of Widener's win against Rowan, but hey, Linfield, I believe, did not play this week, so this is game 1 for them. So Rowan's got a little edge there. Wesley, DelVal. Is Wesley for real? That's the question. DelVal looked like just because they lost Darden, they could just keep on rolling, ultimately. They lost a lot on offense. It's not changing, it doesn't look like. At least that Kane game showed us that much. And UW Oshkosh, we call it the West. I guess we could call it Central America, Central USA, I should say, at Salisbury, Saturday noontime. So 2 games in the NJAC, which involve West Region rivals or teams. I guess it can't be a rival.
These are like
really.
Playoff games, basically. Yeah. I mean, like, this is some major league week 2 kind of stuff. This is normally would be like round 1 or round 2 type NCAA game. So this is pretty cool. Even George Fox, who's kind of flirted with the top 25, which I think honestly, it's one of those situations where it's kind of like with Mary Hardin Baylor and Hardin Simmons. I mean, Simmons can't really keep up with Hardin with UMHB, but they play them sort of close because they're rivals. They get ranked, but are they that good? Now we get to actually see a team from a different conference come out to the East and really, if they blow it out for, then hey, I'll have a whole new respect for the NWC. But until then, the jury's out.
You said different conference, so let's say different region, actually. And
exactly.
Sydney at Christopher Newport is Southeast matchup. So another one right there of an interregional matchup. MAC-wise, hey, probably the cream of the crop when you look at it. 7-4. This is a conference that we've picked on quite a bit over the last year, let's say. And DelVal, FDU, Florham, Stevenson, Alvernia, Wilkes, Kings, and Widener all with wins. That Widener win might be the most impressive of the batch because of the quality of the opponent we saw there.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Widener at Lycoming is always a good game. Always a good game.
Yeah.
And so I just don't see it as being a gimme for Widener, especially on the road. We talked about Wesley at DelVal. Stevenson, Bridgewater at Stevenson. It's an interesting matchup. I don't know which way to really point people in that one because that's another, let's say, cross-regional scenario. It's Bridgewater, I believe Bridgewater VA, correct?
Yes.
Of Virginia.
And not Bridgewater MA, but yes, VA. But I do like the Mustangs in this one. I think that they're sort of my potential favorites in the MAC. We'll see how that pans out, but this is going to be a good test for them for sure.
Yeah, Albright at Mary Hardin Baylor. We heard about some suspensions that may have occurred throughout the spring and fall, not just the fall. We saw some tweets about that. We went to our sources. Yeah. They said there may have been one episode for a suspension from a fall perspective for one player or so, and then other things happened in the spring that we did know about already. And so Mary Hardin Baylor will be playing with some players suspended. Albright flying in. Hey, 91-7 last year, my friend. They're coming back for more to see if they can right the ship at least somewhat here comparatively compared to last year.
Yeah, probably not against this defense, but I will say this. I mean, unfortunately, when you're talking about 18 and 19-year-olds with every team out of the 250 in Division III, there are kids that get suspended from every team, every season, every year. The only reason why we talk about UMHB is because they're defending national champs. And, at the end of the day.
Two reasons. That and Fredenberg actually runs a tighter ship than most when it comes down to it. So he does not fear suspending players for even more minor things from what we can tell compared to some other schools. Not to say that people are letting, all hell break loose on campuses, but some might have a little tendency to be like, okay, they're 18, 19-year-olds. Let's deal with it internally. Fredenberg will actually suspend them and let you know it. And it doesn't matter if it's national championship or week one, ultimately. So give him credit.
That's the way it's got to be. That's got to be. Yeah, that's good. That's what you got to do.
Absolutely. Hey, NESCAC didn't play any games. Let's talk about the fact that Trinity Tufts coming up for the defending champs, Trinity. Williams and Middlebury is a very good week one game. Go ahead.
So I will say this. Fans of D3 may not realize this, but this is the first time these matchups have happened in week one of the NESCAC in about 20-something years, like back to even before, maybe 30 years, even before I was in college. It was a long time ago. I talked to Coach Devaney from Trinity over the offseason, and he's like, we've opened up with Bates every year since, he played at Trinity. He's been a coach at Trinity for 15, 20 plus, close to 20 seasons. And for the first time ever, the Bantams are going to play Tufts on the first weekend. And Tufts is actually a tough opening matchup. The Jumbos have been a solid program, kind of moving up the ranks, started knocking on the door to the top 2 or 3. And so all of a sudden, a lot of these traditional, this conference has been used to seeing the same schedule for a long time. Totally thrown out the window. Last season, they added the 9th game. This year, it's the rotating schedule. And it's going to make things interesting because that sort of every year, this is how we do it. It's going to completely change. May totally affect the conference. Maybe not. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how it goes in the next couple of weeks.
I like some key shuffling, as long as you don't touch the real key rivalries and where they place this season. That's where I get a little edgy. Union RPI used to have that happen where they bounce the thing around, and it was like, come on, just keep it in one place. So let's not keep doing this. That's that. There's not much else to add right now to the NESCAC besides we know who the defending champs are, and our friend Lou Acrillo has probably a very, very heavy hand with all those rings on it as an assistant coach over at Trinity. Yeah, seriously. Lou's a strong guy, though. He can handle another ring if it comes down to it.
Yep.
Lou, how you doing? Let's talk about coach interviews. Let's start with our friend Jason Bowen, who was out at WPI for the big win there against Worcester State. And he talked to Coach Robertson about that win and the upcoming game this coming week against RPI.
The WPI coach, Chris Robertson, after a big win over Worcester State on their opener, 51-0. Coach, got to be happy, crosstown rival on opening night, huge crowd. It's a pretty good night to be a football coach.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great rivalry. We haven't played Worcester State in a couple of years, so it's nice to bring them back. And I'm very close with their head coach, Coach Cullen. We go back, and for as far back as I can remember, I've been here for about 20 years. These have been some of the greatest football games, nip and tuck, one-score games, and I think we were just a little bit more experienced tonight. We're senior heavy with over 30 seniors on the team, and I think our experience really helped us kind of put the tide in our favor tonight.
Tell me a little bit about the second quarter, because you're deep in their territory. You got a couple touchdown leads. You turn the ball over. They get a big play, and you guys personal foul, but you guys really responded and shut them down after that.
Yeah, I think our defense has a great mentality. We work hard to keep everything in front of us, limit the big plays, and I think it showed tonight. when you force a team to really string together a long drive, it becomes more difficult to score, and I think tonight was that. We gave up a couple of 15, 20-yard plays, but for the most part, we made Worcester State earn what they got. And I think that helps us, because when you force those teams into long drives, they're also going to make some mistakes along the way. So defense really stepped up in some critical spots for us tonight.
And I really thought you guys controlled both sides of the line of scrimmage, especially our defensive line. I know coming in that you guys felt that was a strength of your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Our defensive line coach, Coach Holmes, he gets those kids to play so hard for them, and we don't run just one deep, we run two deep with those guys. We rotate 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in every single game, and every single one of those kids are tough, ferocious, strong competitors that know the game, know the position, and again, it really showed tonight against the younger offensive line. I think our guys could really did a nice job of reestablishing the line of scrimmage, and then the great thing is being able to put pressure on the quarterback with a 3- and 4-man rush is critical too.
Talk a little bit about your senior running backs really stepped up tonight. I know they were banged up last year, and you have to like what you saw out of them tonight.
Yeah, for sure. So it's the first time to have Connor Field and Sean McAllen together since 2017, so it's been a long time. And so to have those guys healthy together on the field, it means that we'll be able to do a little bit more. Last year we finished 6-4, and a lot of those games were nip and tuck, one-score games where if we could run the football more effectively late in the game, you probably could get away with a W. So to keep those guys healthy, to have them healthy, it's such a huge asset to the team, and I think it'll give fits to defenses too, because you're going to have not just one great tailback, but two on the field that can pose a threat, both running the football and catching the football too. But great to have those guys healthy.
And I thought your senior quarterback Julian Nyland played a pretty solid game tonight too, running the offense.
Yeah, so he's on when the ball exchanges are good, the decisions are right, and we're just efficient in the pass game. We're not a huge 5-step team. We're more of a play-action team, and we run the ball to throw the football. And tonight we ran the football, and that opened a lot of things up. When they're putting 8 in the box, it gives you a one-on-one matchup, and all he's got to do is put it out there for a slew of really great receivers that we have.
Really great job by your special teams. Highlighted, we talked a little bit earlier about in the second quarter, your defense gets that stop after maybe they get a chance to get back in the football game, and you get a big play out of your special teams on the punt game.
Yeah, so Austin Pesh, our punt returner, he's been doing it for a few years, and he is an electric player for us. If he gets the ball in open space, we do a nice job with our wall returns. He'll find that wall and he'll hit that seam and he'll go. And he's a skinny, wiry kid, but he's tough. He's tough to take down, and I don't think it surprised anybody on our sideline. He's very capable of doing that.
Next week, big rivalry game coming up against a tough opponent, a team that went to the quarterfinals, the NCAAs last year. Won a game the year before that. Talk a little bit about how you feel going into, or the opportunity you have going into this next football game.
Yeah, so RPI is a huge week for us, and it's a nice rivalry that we have. It's a trophy game for us for the Transit Trophy. It brings something a little bit more, than the other games throughout the year. And last year we were in a nip and tuck game with them, but turnovers kind of led to us losing that game. So I think if we can play clean football, we're going to have a chance. And I think tonight it definitely brings us a little bit of confidence. But I told the team, I said, listen, we'll watch the film tomorrow, and then we put it to bed. And RPI week starts probably tomorrow afternoon around 3 o'clock. So we got to get ready to go.
Good to have that extra day too.
Absolutely. Nice to open up on the Friday night.
All right, Coach. Good luck. Thanks, Doug.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much.
Always love some C-Rob discussion. What a charismatic guy he is. He's just somebody that you can listen to all day long. And you know what? Always has a lot of time to discuss things with us and our correspondent, in this case, Jason Bowen. So we really appreciate him. Let's move over to the Empire 8 and Coach Faggiano, who didn't realize I was there. Yeah, look, I don't exactly hold a sign saying, hi, I'm here to these coaches, but
Frank on. You got to keep up. You can't just you got to.
So he's walking up to the tent. He's walking up to the tent because it started pouring out there after that game was done. They had a tent up, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm coming in there." And they're like, "Oh, well, yeah." I'm like, "No, I'm coming in there. Trust me. I've got the equipment here and everything." So Faggiano starts walking down. He's like, "I think I know that guy." He's like, "Hey, D3's here." I'm like, "Oh God."
So wait a minute. Okay. Can you tell me one thing real quick, Frank? Like, what are riggies and green? And what is this?
Chicken riggies is rigatonis with chicken with the sauce. It's not really a true marinara sauce. It's like a little creamy marinara sauce. It's really good. Utica greens are greens like a minest, they call it, but with a little bit of spiciness to it. So greens and beans with a little bit extra garlic and spice to it. So those are the dishes that you may have seen referenced in Twitter. I did not get to have any because I got there so late. I had to get to the game, and then everything's closed at that point. Let's see Coach Faggiano talk about the big win against St. Lawrence and about the Buffalo State game upcoming. You might not hear much over some of the rain because it started coming down during this interview.
Yeah.
Coach, 40-14 victory. It seemed pretty easy in the first half. St. Lawrence didn't seem to really have that momentum your team did in the first half, and then you had to keep them from coming back in the second half. Take me through the game flow overall on this game. How did you feel coming out, and what did you see in your team in that first half especially?
I think one of the big things is that their quarterback's very good, and he had a great year for them last year and a great year in the Liberty League, and he showed that throughout the game. They moved the ball through the pass for the most part. And I think the big tell of the first half, was us being able to run the ball and our two defensive touchdowns. That's pretty wild. That's something that we emphasize. I give a lot of credit to Coach Buff and our DC. And we practice scoring on defense every week, multiple times a week, all training camp. That's something that we take pride in. Last year we had 8 defensive touchdowns, and to start the season with 2 was pretty wild. So I think that really takes the wind out of the team sails in the first half. They're a good offensive team.
You're on a pace for 20 then, basically, right?
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah, sure. I don't know about that.
Coach, the last 3 games of the season you win last year, you put up a decent fight against Brock for that. So 4 out of 5 games you win last year. Your team gains momentum as the rain does behind us right now. And what do they take away from last year and gain basically to start this year with that?
Well, any strong team, it's your senior leadership. We have 32 seniors, and they really welcomed our freshman recruiting class, which was very strong after the bowl win. So we have program momentum right now. And as much youth as we had a lot of guys out here that this was their first varsity reps. We have a senior group, and it showed today.
Well, the volume's going to be a little high for us right now, but I'm going to ask you next week, Buffalo State. Tell me what you think you're going to see in that game.
Well, I haven't watched Buffalo State this year. I know they got a new starting quarterback, new head football coach. I saw the Fisher score. We just got a lot of film to watch. It's good now. It's always tough in the first game because you don't know what they're going to do. If they're a new team, at least Buffalo State, we got that Fisher film to watch and use that moving forward.
I bet you're glad this weather wasn't out there during the game itself.
You look up top and say, can it hold off tonight? We had a great night. This may have been one of our highest attendance crowds. We haven't had a home night game in a couple of years. It was a great atmosphere with the orange out tonight.
Coach, congratulations, 1-0, 9 to go.
Didn't know you were going to be here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks.
Finally, we got one from me, one from Jason Bowen coming up because we have a matchup between DelVal and Wesley coming up in week 2. And we'll start with the DelVal interview with Coach Greco, who, look, he's one of those guys that is short on words, but you can tell he loves his team, loves his game, trusts his team. And we'll let him talk or speak for himself here after that big win at Kane on Friday. Coach Greco, 37-7 victory. The shutout almost was held up there toward the end. Sarah gets a touchdown, but your defense overall played marvelously. After that goal line stand by Kane, they go get the safety. It leads to 9 total points. What was the game flow like for you, especially in that first quarter? What were you telling your team?
I think with us, we just try to play football and try to do it our way, and it's aggressive and attack. And defensively, we did that, for most of the night tonight, and I'm proud of that group. They lived up to the expectation that we try to do, we try to live by here.
Obviously, you lost some players on offense coming to the season. Did you kind of go to the defense in the offseason and say, guys, you need to play up to a higher standard even to make sure that the offense matures and gets to the point where they were last year?
As a staff, I don't think we go to the defense and ask them. I think they know that there's a standard that needs to be set, and they want to live up to that and exceed it. And as a group, as a team, with 32 seniors back and with 37 juniors, so with experience's expectation, the expectations are high.
Fontana, 6 for 8 for 205 yards in the air, 90 yards on the ground. Did you see that coming from him tonight? I mean, obviously he's had experience at DelVal, but to have the start and to have those numbers.
Yeah, I expected it from Anthony. I think he's we played 2 tonight. We played 2 because Bohannon deserves it, because he's going to be a heck of a quarterback too. And Anthony can do some really good things. And as the game went on, I felt like he settled in a little bit too and made some plays. And he's a leader, and he sets the tone every day with his work ethic.
Now here's the typical coach trap question. So here we go. Wesley next week. If your team plays the way they played tonight against Kane, can they beat Wesley next week?
That's a good question. I think we just try to work hard every day. Wesley's an elite program. Total respect for Wesley and the coaches there and the players. So we're just going to try to show up and do the best we can.
A little rain getting out of our screen here, so I'm going to let you go into the locker room, but I'll say congratulations. Big win tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Point counterpoint time now. Chip Knapp, we talked to Jason Bowen after that 69-0 win over Franklin Pierce on Saturday. And obviously this game was definitely in view for his team, but they did not let him down and look too far ahead. They took care of business Saturday, but obviously Wesley DelVal is a marquee game every year. Here it is.
Yep.
All right, we're here with Wesley College head coach Chip Knapp after a 69-0 victory over Franklin Pierce here in southern New Hampshire. And Chip, you got to be happy with how the team played today. You guys really checked all the boxes: offense, defense, special teams.
Yeah, it was kind of an unusual game when you play a team that's never had an NCAA game, played an NCAA game before, and not having any film, really not knowing a lot about them, and going in with the idea that we had to execute what we can do and then see how it works out on the field. And I feel like we did that today. Our special teams, defense, and offense all did what we coached them this week, and the results showed up on the field. So we were real happy with what happened today.
I guess the biggest question mark coming in to today's game was the quarterback situation. You still hadn't settled on either John Mullen or David Morocco, but you got good performances out of both those guys today.
Yeah, both of them, played very well. Dave threw 4 touchdowns. John didn't quite get the opportunity to throw the ball in those situations, but they both executed and they both made plays when they had to, and they looked good. And so, that battle's going to continue, and the competition is going to make them better, and we look forward to seeing how that plays out.
Nearly 300 yards of rushing today, but nobody really over even 75 yards, so you spread the ball around. But talk a little bit about E.J. Lee, who was your leading rusher, and how he's been going forward here. A senior, a guy with nearly 3,000 career yards.
Yeah, when EJ's as good as it gets, and when he's playing, we feel very confident and that we can do anything in the run game. He's a playmaker, is hard to tackle. He doesn't need a whole lot of blocking to make plays, and so having him gives us a lot of confidence in what we can do offensively. But also the guys behind him have played well. We have a whole stable of running backs that are still competing, and the rotation's working itself out. But we have a lot of confidence in the guys behind them too, and it showed today. They all ran the ball well, made plays, when they had to.
Tell us a little bit. It looked like you made a concerted effort to get the ball to your senior receiver, Ruhan Pill. 12 catches in the first half for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, Ruhan is, we like to say, is a man amongst boys, and he's at the point in his career where he just loves playing football. It's come out in the preseason. We've named him captain. He's a team leader, and he wants the ball. And when we get him the ball, good things happen. So that we're going to continue to get him the ball, and we're looking forward to seeing what he can do. As the season progresses, I expect big things from Ruhan.
Defensively, a dominating afternoon, just 3 first downs, and Coach Baudelaire really doing a nice job as the defensive coordinator, and a little bit of scheme change maybe a little bit from last year, but you guys seem to pick it up well.
Yeah, Coach Baudelaire, he's a great coach, and we're seeing the results of his system kind of taking hold. Our guys have had some time to learn it and process it and do it out there on the field. And what we saw today was a result of that. And as a defense is going to be the strength of our team, and I believe, and as they play more and as we get even more comfortable with what we're doing out there, I think our defense is going to be tough to handle this year.
And lastly, you go on the road next week to a ranked team, Delaware Valley. A lot of history and rivalry between these two teams in recent years, in the last decade or so. What do you see as you look forward to that?
Well, they're a great program, and it's always been a tough game, no matter what the rankings or the records. And so we look forward to it. Our guys, it's a game we look to every year. It is a big game for us, and we're looking forward to this Saturday, and I think it's going to be a great game. And so, we're going to be prepared and be ready to go.
All right, thanks, Coach Knapp. Good job.
Thank you.
So you got two coaches with, to me, a little bit different style to them in terms of Greco and Knapp. Knapp is no Mike Drass in terms of the larger-than-life approach, but he obviously got a lot of his polish from Mike Drass when they coached with each other over the years. Like Chip Knapp a lot, like Coach Greco a lot. This is going to be a great matchup. As we close the show, who do you give the edge to as a preview to our prediction show on Friday or Thursday of this week?
Well, if you asked me this last year, I would have said Wesley just because the NJAC was doing so well. But after week one, apparently the NJAC's not doing so great. So maybe the MAC is back, and it's hard to tell because the matchups were against teams that both DelVal and Wesley were so well above. You couldn't really tell, but I know from speaking to Coach Knapp in the offseason that this defense is supposed to be something special for Wesley, and obviously the defense that you saw that DelVal brought to New Jersey was pretty special too. So I think it's going to be one of those classic DelVal Wesley matchups that's going to come down to like a safety or a field goal or some kind of crazy turnover late in the game where the offense is just going to kind of make a mistake late and the defense is going to make a play. So it's kind of a pick 'em game, but I'll give a slight edge to the Wolverines because I feel like after last year, the 6-4 with the 4 losses by 5 points, the Wolverines feel like they have more to prove, and I think they're going to try to bring it to the Aggies.
I'll tell you who I'll pick later in the week. By the way, I got a lot of ribbing by the DelVal guys about saying it would be a close game against Kane. I did not say they'd win Kane, okay? I said it would be a close game. And I heard in the background as Coach Greco was coming up to me, there's Frank! I'm like, uh-oh. And they're like, hey, Frank, you're real close. Yep. And I'm like, oh, boy. Can't hide anywhere now. I'm in the open field. But they read and listen to the things we say. So if you want to hear who we're picking, both of us, on a few of these games, or maybe one per conference we'll pick, tune in on Thursday. Player interviews coming up between that from these various games. We'd like to highlight the players separately because we know you get a lot of value out of those interviews as fans, parents, etc. So tune in for that. Sorry we went long in this show, folks, but look, with this many games, we had to. It's week one. We try to tighten this up to under an hour, the Host Chat Show each week, so stay tuned. And remember, we are on audio as well. If you couldn't watch or can't watch an entire episode, you can listen to it on iTunes. JB, until the next show, we'll see you later.